Welcome all to your show here, Maponga J, live on your Sankofa program on your African narratives and discussing greater issues of politics, economics, and all issues of social empowerment as we are busy developing and rewriting our own narratives. And I'm excited to be having you again today on your show. And thank you for sparing time to give us access into your own private spaces, in your homes, on your phones, and wherever you are. We are excited. We are on top of a serious business in our generation, and that is to rewrite, rethink, reconsider, reevaluate. Everything that is African is not evil. Everything that is European is not righteous. We needed to start finding a way of how do we separate the wheat and the chaff, so that we can begin actually to have a more constructive conversation around the reformation, development of the greater African population, and not forgetting, of course, our problems. Digging back into the Sankofa, looking at solutions from the past, implementing them into the present, and recreating a new future that is awaiting for us all. And for this evening, I would not find a better guest for you than Ubaba Shandu. Shandu. Your first name, you said it was? Jackie Shandu.
That's correct.
He's a lawyer. He comes to us from a legal background. He comes to us from an economic background, a bit of commerce and some law in there, political activism here and there, philosopher, a freelancer, quite a diverse kind of a CV. And in my old age, I'm not yet that old, but with an old spirit, of course. But I'm not yet that old. But when I see young people, and beginning to have an interest in terms of the future of their own country, serious conversations, and and this game is a mental game, and we needed to start firstly beating the system at a mental level before we can become physical and violent, because Africans have been known only we are people of violence, and as if because violence seems to depict that we can't think. And so tonight I want to dig into your private space there in your corners, and we dig deep and hear the mind of a citizen discussing the political, economic terrain. Yes. First question for you. You're sitting on my hot chair today. What's it? I hope I can put some ice blocks at the bottom there just to make sure that I keep you cool. But give us maybe a quick rundown. What can you define ANC to be? What is ANC?
Oh wow! Straight into the deep end, Pastor.
We will swim out.
Oh, thanks. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for the invitation. It is indeed a privilege and honor to be here. With regards to the question, we know the ANC in terms of its inception and its where it is situated historically as a movement born of struggle. The struggle being of the dispossession, firstly the invasion of Africans by aliens from Holland, later.
I like that word, aliens. Yes. Because when I was in Australia, actually I discovered they also called me an alien.
Well, of course.
And the last time I saw an alien was on starships.
So the concept of alien is something or somebody that is somewhere where they do not belong, and they introduce themselves there forcefully. They impose themselves. They are unwanted, they are uninvited. So that's how we end up with a white colonial settler minority in South Africa today. From the mid 1600s, they come unknown, unwanted, uninvited, and they don't come with good intention. They come, and the agenda very early on is clear, that they are here to dispossess, they are here to oppress, they are here to exploit. Starting in the mid 1600s all the way to, say, the early 20th century. That is the culmination of the wars of dispossession.
And the local people
and it is
revolting.
It is the aliens that are dispossessing.
The locals.
And then it is the indigenous people, the natives, that are fighting back, that are trying to resist, that are trying to ward off their dispossession of land. Of course, you mentioned politics, philosophy, and economics. They all have everything to do with land. You can't politic.
The politics of land, the economics of land.
Absolutely. Everything.
The religion of land, the spirituality of land.
Absolutely, absolutely. So everything was about land. So 1906, in terms of South African history, recent history, I think that's the culmination with the Bambata rebellion in KZN. The natives are totally defeated and they are dispossessed. And of course they are exploited and oppressed. Now, we had to then change our ways of resisting and rebelling because on the military front, or on the battlefront, we had obviously lost. So there's that change in strategy and tactics.
The will was strong. The weapons were weak.
Of course.
If we can make it in a simpler.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the formation of the ANC heralds that change in our manner of resistance as the invaded, dispossessed, oppressed and exploited indigenous majority. The ANC is founded primarily on one question, the land question.
Land question.
In fact,
you're not ready for the follow-up question of that. Because if we started this conversation in the 1920s,
right,
and the main question was land,
right,
and when you come to 2020,
right,
and the question is still land, the question remains.
Yes.
Well, then what are we? What are we? What will we fight for?
Right.
If we have not yet answered the first question that caused the war.
In fact, any other fight without the centrality, without first fighting and winning the land fight, any other fight becomes futile.
Wow.
That is how you explain how all colonial iniquities have been reproduced, in certain aspects getting even far worse in the past 26 years of so-called democracy and freedom.
Which has ended up as neocolonialism.
Absolutely. Simply because the liberation movement failed to achieve its key objective.
First question.
The objective for which it came into existence. And I mean, I don't know how the ANC can evade this question, because the 1944 generation, the point at which the ANC Youth League is formed, the founding manifesto of the Youth League of the ANC, it advances a scathing critique on its mother body, the ANC. It essentially says
on how it was hitting colonialism with woolen gloves,
absolutely,
with soft gloves.
Absolutely.
It's almost like I saw a cartoon the other day of how ANC is fighting the system. There was, I mean, it's like literally you're not punching this thing.
Absolutely. And this youth league, by the way, included people like Walter Sisulu, Oliver Tambo.
These were the youth of the day.
Nelson Mandela, Ellen Kuzwayo. You know, it's a long list.
Mpumalanga, and we lost a stalwart.
Absolutely.
Who ended up also on Robben Island and stuff.
Apim Da, Anton Lembede. They said to the ANC, you have forgotten why you came into existence. You came into existence because the year after you were formed, there was something called the Native Land Act in 1913 that was enacted by an illegitimate so-called South African state or parliament constituted by both the Dutch and the British colonial settler dictatorship of the time. Remember, in 1910, when the Act of Union comes into effect and so-called South Africa is born, it is enshrined in the documents or in the act that the African majority are not citizens of South Africa. They're not citizens of a country that
where they are born
has been stolen from them, you see.
So that act actually went on to explain that the indigenous people were now the aliens.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the aliens were now the indigenous.
The indigenous.
I want to pin a question there.
Sure.
Freely.
Absolutely.
Now we look at BLF and we look at EFF, riding again on the same zeal of the Youth League of 1944.
Right.
On them again, resurfacing.
Yes.
That same mandate that was established in the 1920s on the building of the ANC as a founding statement that land must be restored to the indigenous people. And the Youth League comes in the 1944s to argue the same issue.
Absolutely.
Way into the 2000s, you begin to see again another sage from the young people.
Yes.
And so maybe this whole thing must be discussed correctly.
Yeah.
To say old people cannot help Africa in terms of change.
Well,
1976
yes.
is not a youth organization. It's not an old people's organization.
Absolutely.
It's a youth organization.
Absolutely.
And if you are looking into the future, because I want to ask you this question.
Yes.
What is your commentary on the formation of breakaway movements away from ANC, re-emphasizing the mandate that ANC is ignoring? How would you look at the political terrain and the way it is panning out in the South African space in terms of opposition parties, which are actually now have become opposition parties? But what they are now raising as opposition is actually the key fundamental of formation.
Right. Well, I mean, very loaded question, very interesting. One could approach it from a wide variety of angles. Perhaps I could start with Julius Nyerere's critique, yes, of the dominant governance model in Africa, especially in the so-called post-colonial state. So after the colonial powers handed over nominal independence, starting with Nkrumah in Ghana in the 50s and to the rest of the continent, Nyerere laments the fact that even at the moment of independence and at the beginning of what is supposed to be the undoing of all the damage that had taken place during decades of colonialism, but Africa by and large inherited all the structures and the systems on which Africa had been governed during colonialism. So, for example, Nyerere makes the point that the political system of Britain, which is adopted by all former
Anglo-Saxons,
British colonies in Africa. In Britain, you have the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The House of Lords is essentially the ruling class, the aristocracy, the nobility, captains of industry.
And the Commons are the workers.
And the Commons are the Labour Party, But then he says, in Africa, you don't have those constituencies, so to speak. You don't have an African bourgeoisie proper. And in many parts of Africa, especially at the time,
Frantz Fanon also laments that in some of...
So many of our failures, one can, with a great deal of authority say, this ongoing neo-colonial agenda. And so we are putting as a standard the very same alien system that was violently imposed on us. And we continue to want to measure our success, our progress
based on a colonial system. Don't go away. We'll be back right after the break, and I have 3 questions for him back to back. I want him to take us through the ANC of formation, the ANC in exile, and the ANC in government now. Are these 3 different political parties, or it is still the same political party? And the plight of ANC, has it not duplicated itself throughout the whole continent of Africa? When we come back after the break, with our Honorable Shandu here, taking us through some paces in political conversation. Don't go away. We'll be back after the break.
Hello. Being a legal practitioner in South Africa in these challenging times demands lawyers that will help clients beyond legal issues. The ever-changing demands in commerce and tourism require lawyers who have sound and clear business and commercial knowledge. And that's where MB Chabangu Incorporated comes in. Our business, mining, tourism, health, labor, and economic knowledge encapsulated with law and litigation experience gives us an advantage in the legal sphere. Our experience in assisting businesses, government, and various industries with their needs puts us amongst the many progressive and striving law firms in South Africa. Now, to contact our attorneys for assistance with any of the mentioned fields and others, please call us on 012-341-4187 or send us an email on admin @chabangu.co.za, MB Chabangu Incorporated, where problems meet solutions.
Welcome back. Here we're sitting on my hot chair today is Utatu Shandu. Mr. Shandu himself is a politician in his own right. He's a lawyer and he's an economic student and a researcher, a philosopher, with a long list. And nice to see young people expanding their brains, kicking the walls and re-establishing new frames of thinking. 3 questions for you back to back.
Sure.
See how you can package them.
Sure.
ANC of Reformation.
Right.
The ANC in exile.
Right.
The ANC in government.
Right.
Can you tell me, is this the same political party?
Certainly not. Certainly not. In fact, my periodization would be as follows. From 1912 to 1944, it's the ANC of the elite, and it's not a liberation movement.
What is it?
It is a civil rights movement, pretty much like Martin Luther King's Martin Luther King's model in the US. It's the native elite, not even fighting, pleading, begging for inclusion. You would recall that 2 years after formation, the ANC sent a deputation to Buckingham Palace, to King George in the UK. The then president of the ANC was part of that deputation, John Dube, Sol Plaatje and others. And they were snubbed, but they were just there to say, we are loyal subjects of the British Crown.
Yes.
That's what they said themselves. We are just being excluded. We want to participate. Further than that, they even said, unlike the masses of the native people, we are uneducated. We are part of the educated, sophisticated minority.
Where the bourgeoisies.
Absolutely. So that's, for me, founding moment, 1912 all the way to 1944. 1944 is a serious game changer in the history of the ANC. For the first time, the ANC is infused with ideological orientation. The philosophy of African nationalism.
Pan-Africanism.
Absolutely. People like Lembede and Mda, who were very instrumental in the crafting of that philosophy. They take the ANC and they rebuke it. They said, no, you have been napping and you've put on...
Sleeping on the job.
You know, put on kid gloves and you've been appealing to the conscience and the reason of the oppressor. And the oppressor has neither, you know? So from that moment, the ANC takes a really...
We cannot forget. We cannot forget women.
Sure.
We cannot forget the women and the marches. So let's put everything together. So with the bourgeoisie, with the youth, and with the women.
Yes.
So we want to see where the boiling pot is. That actually brings the change that we are looking for.
Right. So from 1944, 1949, there's a program of action sponsored by the Youth League, which was very radical and militant, but it becomes the official policy framework of the ANC at the conference of the ANC in 1949 in Bloemfontein, where the ANC is demanding land and is actually making the correct claim that this land belongs to its native African people, and so on and so forth. Then there's 1956, another a complete shift of the nature, the outlook and the approach of the ANC, a very negative one, where the ANC is outsmarted by its new alliance partners, which was the Indian Congresses as well as the Communist Party. They take
the Communist Party are bringing Marxism with them.
Absolutely, but not just that. They deliberately distort and misdiagnose the South African problem, as it were. They craft a document which the ANC wrongly and unfortunately adopted the following year. And the departure point of that...
What document was that?
The so-called Freedom Charter.
Freedom Charter.
We call it the Kliptown Charter because that is where it was...
signed.
Yeah, but there's nothing that alludes to freedom about it because it moves from a wrong premise that this country belongs to all who live in it, black and white, whereas this country belongs to its native people who were invaded and dispossessed. And there was never a moment where whites as violent expropriators came and said, we are sorry, We invaded you, we raped you, we exploited you, we stole your land, we are handing it back. There was never that moment, you know. So you cannot then simply auction the homeland of Africans without any process of justice, particularly on the part of the wrongdoers, to first acknowledge their wrongdoing,
the crime,
and then humbly request to be accommodated in terms of how we move forward.
We needed to accept them on our terms.
Absolutely.
Because the whole country was a crime scene.
Absolutely. So, from 1956 onwards, I don't know what to characterize the ANC as, because from then it has been fighting a wrong, confused, futile battle that it has not won, and it will essentially never win. That is why 26 years later.
No, I want you to take me through the ANC in exile.
Sure.
Before you can come to our democratic space.
Sure. No, of course. I mean...
so the ANC moves into Zambia,
yes,
into Tanzania,
yes,
some are in Russia,
yes,
and
yes,
some are polishing their degrees.
Yes. Well, and also there is a strong influence of the Communist International or the Soviet Union. I think the key ally, of course, is Russia, due to the strong influence of the Communist Party.
Why don't we have Russians in South Africa here? It's strong presence. Well, I mean, they were involved much more in terms of our liberation than the British.
No, of course.
But why is it in terms of our demographics? I don't see a presence of our key partners. Because, I mean, if someone helps you to get you out of a mess, for crying out loud, Russia is doing well on gas and oil, well on technology, well on ammunitions and etc. And I would think that ANC, at a moment of assuming power, they would not forget the partners who actually brought them into. Rather, we find South Africa signing arms deals with France,
yes. And Britain.
You know, Britain,
yes,
going back almost again to the same.
Yes.
Why would you not? Do you see where I'm coming from?
Oh, absolutely. It's a wide variety of factors, but I would pin it on the process of the beginning of the process of which culminated in the negotiated settlement. You'd recall that you had the business class, the white capitalist class inside the country, coming to terms with the inevitability of change and non-racial democracy.
Yes, sir.
So they begin on their own a process of engaging the leadership of the ANC, particularly in Lusaka, the first official meeting between Business South Africa, some elements from the National Party and the ANC, whilst the ANC was still banned in exile. You know, happens in Lusaka. It's presided over by Father Kenneth Kaunda, and the talks begin there. These are two elites. They begin to find each other. You know, those talks, of course, are extended. Later on, they move to Dakar, Senegal, and they are thrashing out, in particular, the post-apartheid macroeconomic system of South Africa. So that is where they begin to, the ANC begins to make these concessions. It didn't help that also the ANC at the time is largely in the hands of petty bourgeois and very pro-Western, you know, someone like Thabo Mbeki, who was always a central figure in those negotiations, who had studied bourgeois economics in the UK, who himself subscribed to, you know, neoclassical economics, the primacy of the so-called free market, and you know, very little state intervention, so that the private sector can, you know, do as it wishes. So much of the iniquities that we see, which are so are the key defining features of post-1994 South Africa: massive unemployment, almost complete underdevelopment in African communities in this country, are as a result of those, you know, one scholar, Patrick Bond, calls it in his book an elite pact. The two elites met and
did a pact.
They found each other, but the native elite forgot about
the people,
the vulnerable,
the powerful,
the poorest of the poor, who were the overwhelming majority. Of course, the white elite were coming, representing a constituency that has always been privileged, that has always had access to education, that could look after themselves. They did not need a state. Why? Because the colonial state had looked after them, the apartheid state had looked after them. They were at a point where you could basically wither the state, do away with the state, and be big on individualism, you know. Look after yourself, you are your own responsibility. If you're not doing good, it's because you're not working hard. All that nonsense. Our guys forget, and they agree to these things. As a result, we have retained all colonial patterns of wealth accumulation, distribution, and consumption, the entire mode of production, economically in particular, in South Africa. We can go
remains
back.
trapped
Absolutely
in the hands of the...
And as long as that happens, we can, you know, freedom is a long way coming.
Is it your feeling that maybe we're just swapping foxes with hyenas?
It very well could be, and that's why I'm also not a big fan of the youth fetish. This idea that if you get rid of the old guard and you put in relatively young people, that on its own automatically means that there's going to be positive change. If you look at the behavior, the conduct of young leaders, whether inside the ANC or in the opposition, crass materialism, being implicated in massive corruption. Right now, as we speak here in Gauteng, we're dealing with a relatively young MEC for health, whose since has had to be suspended because of allegations of corruption. We're speaking about a relatively young presidential spokesperson that has also taken a leave of absence. You see? So this idea that you take a 70-year-old, you replace him or her with a 30-year-old, that on its own signals
Don't
progress.
hurry me there. I've enough waiting for you on that corner there. I just wanted to clarify the political the political journey of the party from its inception to its exile stories, because we know in Tanzania there are communities there which are fully populated with South African children.
Right.
Where graves which are populated with South African people who died there.
Right.
Some in Angola, some in Zambia.
Right.
And in all honesty, this is my own personal opinion, that at the moment of independence, it would have been nice to recognize at least your soldiers, when they were away, our sisters in Africa looked after them.
Absolutely.
In all ways. They looked after them. You know, as wives. they were looked after sexually. There's nothing to hide here.
Absolutely.
Their children, some of them old as me,
absolutely,
who cannot even be given access into South Africa now. They must struggle. And their father is in Mkondo Sizwe in South Africa.
Absolutely. In fact,
the woman is talk to me. Gloves off.
In fact, I read an interesting study on, you see, you are talking about people that were in exile for years. I wasn't aware that during soccer World Cup tournaments, it's roughly a 3-week tournament. It's staged in one country. Apparently, there are always World Cup babies that are left behind.
Wow.
In all those countries, simply because there's a
soccer time. After
playing
soccer,
3 weeks.
They go and play soccer somewhere else.
Soccer babies,
yeah.
World Cup babies, they are known as.
Wow.
You know, so absolutely. I mean, these guys, they were on a fundamentally different mission over a much longer period of time. So the things that happened absolutely did happen.
We'll be back after the break, and as we toothpick now, I want him to give me a clear definition of what is politics. And how is this foreign monster called democracy or demon crazy penning itself and busy dancing on our African terrain, putting on pantyhose and tight little shoes, tiptoeing around our economy and religious spaces? Have we benefited from this political system? Stay with us. We'll be back after the break with Jackie Shandu.
God is so amazing.
Feel the heat.
The Bible says that through his death on the cross, we are now reconciled with our Father.
Forgive and you shall be forgiven.
So wherever God takes us, we're just excited about it.
As a child of God, where you are, you must have an hour of prayer.
Feel the excitement. In the name of Jesus, in the name of Jesus.
I believe that God is working right now.
Feel the heat with StarSat.
The coronavirus outbreak.
Experience the extraordinary.
Tremendous waste and tremendous fraud. Mexico is, in fact, you will soon find out.
It is a day to celebrate.
We don't approve at all what's going on.
Well, I don't know if it's necessarily unusual.
Challenge your ordinary.
Not only the government, the municipality here has had no plan.
Experience the extraordinary with StarSat.
Join me, Mpumalanga, on Inside Out on Galaxy. This is a show that helps individuals on how to deal with serious matters from the inside out. This is to help remedy the effects that depression seems to have in our homes, relationships, individuals, and even our communities at large. We will look at some of the devastating effects that depression has on media personalities, prominent people, and our own brothers and sisters. Some of our loved celebrities and musicians having had to go through depression and fought a losing battle. How can this be prevented and minimized? And what causes this? From the inside out.
Welcome back, and thank you again for keeping us in your lounges and watching and supporting. We appreciate your support greatly here at Galaxy Universal Network, and we are very glad that you have allowed us to become partners in your growth and in your development. And as we are sharing these great African perspectives, if you have guests that are around the South African space who can come into the studio here and share their stories with us, please we'll put the number at the bottom there. The people in the studio there can just put the number at the bottom there. Please call us at the studios, and we also want to hear your views from home there, from various parts of Africa. If you are coming to South Africa, it's unfortunate because of Corona, but if you are in South Africa and you want to say something to the great African continent, this is your show. Please just phone us ahead of time. We'll also make time in the interview on our program. Our guest for today, Mr. Shandu.
Yes, sir.
And taking us through some political paces there. Question for you.
Sure.
Define politics for me.
Well, for me, politics is a combination of an art and science of how a people, and in current times, obviously, a people will be along the lines of a nation state, decide through some form of social contract how to organize and govern themselves. Absolutely. So that's pretty
So that's the science of governing and ruling people.
Absolutely.
So what is the difference between politics and the politics of politics?
Well,
because politics for me is the honest part, where you want to govern and you want to run the environment or the community. But the politics of politics, my definition, is now how do you manage those who want to manage? And how do you influence the decisions of those who want to manage others? So by the time you are dealing with the political front, you want to understand there is politics.
Absolutely.
That informs campaigns, that informs recruitment, that informs the mobilization. And those things are not mobilized by prayer and fasting and buttons. They are mobilized by money and etc. So there is politics in my world, and there is politics of politics.
Absolutely.
How would you see the politics of politics affecting the politics of South Africa?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, and it makes perfect sense. I'm a passionate student of pre-colonial African history. So I would go back to that particular epoch where Africans organized themselves in a particular kind of system of governance, and obviously economic production and so on and so forth. And there was no starvation. And
people working together.
People were cooperating. People were doing quite well, and
there were no orphans.
No, absolutely.
No prisons.
Absolutely, that was politics. And then there is the moment of the disruption of that system and that civilization with the unfortunate arrival of European terrorists and invaders. And then, once they are here, they collapse, they destroy our systems, they collapse and they destroy our institutions. The institutions...
Indigenous governance systems.
You see, and then they impose. So we, as I alluded to earlier, but I was focusing on the economics. We're now talking politics. Our political system, again, has been prescribed, if not imposed, for us by those who invaded us and conquered us.
I have 3 questions. So
we remain a conquered
I would want you to put them in tandem, so that when you fall in the trap, you fall nicely.
Sure.
So we have the definition of politics, how to manage, how to govern, and we are aware that every politician, there is a price to pay to run the offices and find funders who are in the background.
Well, in terms of
would determine
in terms of this alien system that is still imposed on us, which it's not a system of our choosing.
It's a reality.
This is very important.
Define for me what is democracy.
Well, loosely defined, it's the prevalence of the will of the people, government of the people, by the people.
There you go.
For the people.
The famous statements.
Well, loosely. However,
those are the political slogans.
Of course. But I want to make what is highly problematic with democracy as popularly understood. It is the hegemonic Western conception. It's the hegemonic, dominant Western conception of democracy that says every 2-3 years you have a right to put an X next to a box to pick someone. For example, in South Africa, a country with almost 60 million citizens, why is lawmaking given to 400 individuals? 400 individuals
decide for 60 million.
These are members of parliament.
And these are bourgeoisies.
Absolutely. So
who are there to protect the business
is that democracy?
Oh, no, that's why I'm asking you.
That's why I'm asking you. Is that the will of the people prevailing? You know, when all power is in the hands of 400 people.
I will assist you.
You see,
I will assist you to define democracy. Democracy is when the masses give their power to the few to manage them and make decisions on their behalf.
In the Western sense.
But as it is practiced on the African...
You see, we must be able to, because of course we are living in an era where even the concept of decolonization is finding traction, right? So when we define, we must be quick to say, well, from the Western paradigm, you know, because this universalization of the Western outlook and Western norms is part of the reason we're here,
in this mess.
Where we are, right? So Europeans define democracy in the way that they do, in particular with the French Revolution and the Republic of France, right? Voting, the so-called universal adult franchise. Africans have always practiced democracy. In fact, if you look at African governance model, if you look at the African judicial system, nothing could be more democratic, more open,
let me just throw
participating.
I like where you're coming from.
Sure.
Because at least you're putting a clear distinction between what we might call democracy in its honesty, in its purity.
Sure.
And even in its purity, I cannot say it is Western.
Right.
It is a universal principle.
Right.
But as we have it on the African continent, and as it is being practiced by African governments, my question to you will be, do you think that the African governments and the African political bourgeoisies and the African elite and the African leaders actually understand what democracy is in terms of its concept, in terms of its implementation, and its mandate to deliver what it says on paper, on your manifesto, vis-a-vis what it does on the ground?
At the risk of sounding contradictory, I would argue that they actually do. And what is happening is simply a reflection of a conscious decision on the part of the African elite to betray the masses of the people and become willing servants of
Uncle Tom's,
the Western capitalist establishment in particular. It is conscious. The ANC knew what needed to be done. If you go to, for instance, to the minutes of the Morogoro conference, if you go to some of its later documents, ready to govern and things like that, they understood the centrality, the sacrosanct importance of resolving the land question, the importance of reparations for colonialism and apartheid, social justice program, state-led programs of wealth redistribution. Because in South Africa in particular, the problem is skewed distribution of wealth. It's not a problem of scarcity, as bourgeois economics would argue. You know, there's so much abundance. South Africa is one of the highest per capita incomes in the world. But what South Africa has been doing, largely through the willingness of the ANC to continue with the colonial project, is to retain the patterns of wealth accumulations that continue to favor the dispossessors, the oppressors, the exploiters. As a result, studies will tell you that the white minority of South Africa has accumulated more wealth in the 26 years
post-apartheid
of so-called democracy than they did throughout the duration of apartheid. You see? So these things, there's no confusion here. I think Thabo Mbeki is a very smart man. Paulo Jordan, there are others as well who understand history, who understand economics, who understand political philosophy, who know why society is so uneven, why South Africa and how it is still the most unequal society on the planet in terms of wealth and income inequality. You know, more than 50% of the workforce in this country earns something less than 3,000 rands a month.
Before we go for the break,
sure,
a curveball for you.
Sure.
President Emmerson Mnangagwa a few days ago sits around and agrees that he's going to pay the colonial people, the white farmers, 3-point-something billion dollars to compensate them for land invasion and land dispossession. Your comments?
You know, to be honest, I haven't commented on that.
I'm asking for the comment.
Often, I'm among the first to
comment.
But
this way time you're mixed feelings.
No, not at all. I'm so depressed. I'm totally broken. You know, I feel I lack the grammar and the language. You know, and it begs a number of questions. You know, in terms of the forces behind the coup that Mnangagwa led against President Robert Mugabe. Was this always the understanding that once they've dislodged President Mugabe, this is what would happen? That's the first thing that comes to mind. The second thing, which does not make sense to me, you would have noted that the West has not been so excited about Mnangagwa's ascendance because in its own understanding and logic, he's still associated
with the old regime.
You know, the old regime, the guys who waged, you know, a serious war of liberation and defeated
the British
militarily.
Yes,
Ian Smith.
We beat them. We beat them.
So, but beyond that,
Sabashai.
Zimbabwe, more than 70% of its foreign debt is owed to China. So, and the economists in the West understand this, that so there's not much because, of course, debt.
I just wish from the 500 billion we got for COVID,
right?
500 billion.
Yeah.
You know, if Cyril could have borrowed Mnangagwa the 3 billion, you know, because it has already disappeared also apparently, you know.
Well, besides that, I mean, there's a more central question on how immoral, how unethical, how treacherous this action is, because the thousands of our people that were dispossessed by British thugs that invaded Zimbabwe through Cecil John Rhodes in particular at that time, you know, doing what they did to people like Chief Lobengula, going on to Mashonaland doing the same thing. Those people have never tasted freedom and justice. They've never.
After the break, we come back to unpack issues of freedom on the African continent, and I'll be throwing a few curveballs for him to be tiptoeing up on the African politics, right from South Africa into North Africa. Sure. Just maybe picking up the minds of the young people as they are looking into the future. What does it look like? We'll be back right after the break.
Hello. Being a legal practitioner in South Africa in these challenging times demands lawyers that will help clients beyond legal issues. The ever-changing demands in commerce and tourism require lawyers who have sound and clear business and commercial knowledge, and that's where MB Chabangu Incorporated comes in. Our business, mining, tourism, health, labor, and economic knowledge encapsulated with law and litigation experience gives us an advantage in the legal sphere. Our experience in assisting businesses, government, and various industries with their needs puts us amongst the many progressive and striving law firms in South Africa. Now, to contact our attorneys for assistance with any of the mentioned fields and others, please call us on 012-341-4187 or send us an email on admin@chabangu.co.za. MB Chabangu Incorporated, where problems meet solutions.
Welcome back on our hot seat today with Ntate Shandu, Babu Shandu, taking us through some paces on the African continent. Is the African child free in your own world? When you look from Cape to Cairo, is the African child enjoying the freedom? And if they are free, how free are they? If they are not free, what is binding them?
Well, we can't say Africans are free. If we look at all the social and economic indicators, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, if you look at the low life expectancy that we still suffer from, if you look at this massive structural unemployment that still dogs the region, if you look at things such as the high infant mortality rates, the widespread hunger, and just other forms of lack of development, if you look at how we are being also ravaged by preventable and curable diseases and illnesses, you know, outbreaks of things such as Ebola. If you look at countries like Sudan and the South Sudan, the DRC has not been functioning as a proper state since the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. You know, the Sudan has been dogged by decades of civil war around Darfur, leading to the point of the death of Dr. John Garang, thereafter the cessation and the creation of the very new nation state of South Sudan. One could go to Mozambique and Angola, where almost 60% of the people subsist below the poverty line. Gets worse if you go to Malawi and other places. If you look at what's happening in Mali, for example, Burkina Faso, the ISIS making serious inroads, the forced Islamization, in particular of West Africa, including the Niger. You look at the presence of Boko Haram in Nigeria, and also this idea that in Nigeria for the longest time, southern Nigeria, staunch Christian, which in my view is also an alien belief system in Africa. North with the Fulani and the Hausa, strictly Islamic. You know, so why are we still pitted against each other for such nonsensical things as Africans.
Let me just ask you the question right there. What role do you think Christianity, religion, Islamization, and Christianization of the Africans, what role do you think they played on the colonial state and the implementation of the colonial project on the African continent?
Well, one of the key methods, one of the key instruments of the process of the colonization of the African continent was religion. You'd recall first there was Arab slave trade in Africa for hundreds of years, starting in the 7th century AD. That is why today we have Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, known as Arab Africa or North Africa. Arabs are not natives of Africa. They come from the Arabian Peninsula. They came, they massacred, they slaughtered, they raped, and they also traded in Africans. But in the process, to sort of make Africans timid, you know, to reproduce the docility and the slave mentality, to internalize it in Africans, what did they do? They forced the Quran down the throats of Africans. Today, you have Africans themselves who would not question why they should have Arabic names and pray in Arabic and have a holy place somewhere outside Africa. 700 years later, it's the Portuguese, it's the Dutch, it's the Roman Catholic Church. It is the Pope who gave permission for Portugal to invade, colonize, trade. Absolutely. The transatlantic slave trade, it's along the same logic. 400 years later, 1800, 1900, the colonial project, you know.
Berlin colonial project.
David Livingstone speaks about the 3 C's in Africa. You know, you civilize, you Christianize, you know, and you instill capitalism. So there is no way you can look at Christianity and Islam outside
of the colonial
that
project.
Historical context that these were part and parcel.
Quick punches on the wall. A new president in Malawi, what's your advice to him?
Well,
they're listening.
Sure.
Yes.
I would advise any African president to switch allegiances from unknown forces that remote control and take their allegiance to the people.
Second question, African countries paying taxes to France?
Oh yes, that again, I don't know how that is still ongoing. It is deplorable, it is inexcusable. So-called Francophone Africa needs to get together and begin to assert themselves. They need to look into great African thinkers and revolutionaries coming from the Francophone, so-called Francophone, Sheikh Anta Diop, Frantz Fanon, Sekou Touré and others, who stood and who understood that there was no way Africans could be French. Of course, there's a slight complication because France's method of colonization, I would argue, was a bit more sophisticated than the British, because there was this concept of assimilation. So France pushed the French language throughout its sphere of influence in Africa, and it also pushed the idea that all were French, irrespective of color. So this is my discovery even in my travels, when you meet brothers and sisters who come from Cameroon or Burkina Faso.
They are French.
They claim to be French.
Bonjour, comment ça va, comment chantez-vous? So, in a quick one, Biafra.
Sure.
What's your comment on Biafra?
Well, you know, I'm always for the unity of Africans, you know. So I'm a bit torn also because I'm a big fan of Chinua Achebe, who fought in the Biafran War. But I'm also a big fan of Fela Kuti,
the musician.
you know, who is, you know, was on the other side of the war. But there was someone else, Ken Saro-Wiwa. Funny enough, his reflections on the Biafran War, even though he was part of Eastern Nigeria, they were dominated by the Igbos who were seceding. But he comes from the Ogoni people. They're in the
Ogoni?
Ogoni, yes.
You know what is Ogoni? Ogoni
yes.
is the same word for Angoni.
Okay.
Ongoni.
Right.
Angoni, which is actually the tribes of the south.
Oh, wow. Yes.
So the Ogoni of Nigeria are the same with the Angonis of southern Africa.
Right.
When the white people could not pronounce Angoni, they call them Nguni.
Ah, I see.
You get that? At least you learned something new today.
Absolutely.
1 minute, 1 minute left. If you are the president of South Africa, tell me 3 things you do differently.
Sure. 1. Land expropriation without compensation.
2.
Reparations for colonialism and apartheid.
3.
Africanization of the judicial system of South Africa.
Maponga je chigarambo kugarama shamba uda chira na vana vevanji tisivano mutambo uri paruware vana chigarama mabuke matanda anovora chibwe chitedza chinokugwa na vana manga vari pedo vanotamba nacho. Widamiti yasoshe until we see you again on your show here, Sankofa. Our guest for today, Jackie Shandu. Please enjoy your weekend. Don't do what I wouldn't do. If you do it better. Thank you very much, sir.